How's everybody doing? I've got chapter 25 here of Book 2 of the Royal Rangers series, The Red Fox Clan. Let's go ahead and get into it. Hal Mikkelsen was a distinct contrast to his crewman Stig. He was slighter in build and not as tall, although he was well-muscled and fit. His hair was light brown, worn long, and tied back from his face in a neat queue. He was clean-shaven and, Maddie noticed with interest, very handsome. His brown eyes were friendly as he reached to take her hand. "Princess Madeline," he said, and she shook his hand. His eyes showed slight surprise for a second as he felt her firm grip. "Call me Maddie," she said. He nodded, pleased with her lack of formality. Scandians didn't go in for that sort of thing. She heard Damone clear his throat, a disapproving sound. She assumed it was because of Hal's casual approach. The Skrull, as she now knew him to be, turned to Cassandra, a wide grin on his face. He relinquished Maddie's hand and stepped forward to embrace her mother. Again, Damone shifted his feet awkwardly. "Cassandra," Hal said, "it's good to see you again." "And you, Hal. It's been too long," Cassandra said. When she was free from Hal's embrace, she touched Maddie's arm lightly and indicated the third Scandian. "This is Thorn," she said, pausing before adding, "I'm not sure if I've ever heard your second name, Thorn." Thorn was unlike anyone Maddie had ever met. He was older than the other two, tall and heavily built. Bear-like, she thought. Though the bulk was all muscle, not fat. His iron-gray hair grew in wild tangles, and he had it set in two loose plaits. His beard and mustache were equally unkempt. His mustache, in fact, was uneven, one side being longer than the other by several centimeters. This was because a few days prior, working on tarring a seam on the ship's deck, he had inadvertently gotten a large dollop of tar on the right side of his mustache. Unable to clean it off, he had simply taken his sacks and removed the offending section. Thorn was dressed in the leggings and sealskin boots that Scandian sailors habitually wore, and his upper body was covered by an amazing sheepskin vest. At least, Maddie thought it might have been sheepskin originally. Now, it was covered with variegated patches, sewn on haphazardly wherever they were needed. Studying him, Maddie thought there might be more patches than original garment. His eyes were blue, and had a far-seeing look to them. He seemed to view the world with a constant sense of amusement, and she found herself instinctively liking him. But the most notable feature of the man was his right hand, or rather, the lack of it. His arm ended halfway down the forearm, and the hand had been replaced with a polished wooden hook. He brandished it now in answer to Cassandra's implied question. "It's Thorn Hooky Hand, your royalty," he told her, grinning hugely. Thorn's disregard for protocol and royal titles was even stronger than that of most Scandians. "Actually, he's usually known as Thor Hammerhand," Stig told them. Maddie frowned. The wooden hook was substantial, but it didn't look at all like a hammer. "Hammerhand?" she queried. Stig explained. "When we go into battle, he changes the hook for a huge club that Hal made for him. It fits over the end of his arm, and he can smash helmets, shields, and armor with it." His grin widened. "He's terrible in battle." "He's terrible any time," Hal interposed, and all three Scandians and Cassandra laughed heartily. Hal indicated the ship, moored a few meters away. "Come and meet the rest of the crew," he said, adding to Cassandra, "They'll be pleased to see you again, Princess." They crossed the jetty to the little ship, Hal assisting Cassandra down onto the bulwark and then the deck. Stig held out his hand to Maddie, but she didn't notice, negotiating the gap from the jetty to ship's railing easily, then stepping down lightly onto the deck. Thorn eyed her astutely. She wasn't the usual simpering, giggling princess that you might expect, he thought. But then, of course, she was Cassandra's daughter. Like her mother, she was slim and moved with an easy athleticism, aside from a slight limp, he noticed. His keen eyes noted the sling coiled neatly under her belt, and the pouch of lead shot. He also noticed that she had a sheathed sax at her side, Hardly the sort of thing one would expect a young woman at court to be carrying. Altogether, a fascinating character. As she met the other members of the crew and chatted with them, Thorn noted her easy confidence and self-assurance. She wasn't daunted or overawed in the presence of this group of capable, tough men. She seemed quite at home in their presence, in fact. He also noted that the Heron seemed to react well to her, treating her as an equal, albeit one to be respected. There's more to this one than meets the eye, he thought. Cassandra was looking round the ship, a slightly puzzled expression on her face. "Where's Lydia? Is she no longer with you?" Stig offered a sad smile. "She's still a Heron," he told her, "but Agatha, the old woman who took her in when she first came to Hallesholm, is very ill. Agatha's been like a surrogate mother to Lydia since she's been with us. The healers don't give her a lot of time, and Lydia thought she should stay with her this time, instead of coming on this trip." "More's the pity," said the huge man, who wore a strange dark patches of tortoiseshell over his eyes. He had been introduced as Ingvar. "We all miss her." Cassandra turned to her daughter, her disappointment obvious. "That's a shame. I really wanted you to meet her. She's an amazing woman, just as much a warrior as any of this lot." She made an all-encompassing gesture that took in the rest of the crew. Her smile robbed the words of any insult, and several of them grunted assent. Thorn frowned thoughtfully. Why would Cassandra be so keen to have her daughter meet a girl warrior like Lydia? He looked at Maddie again. Ingvar had taken her forward and was showing her the workings of the Mangler, the massive crossbow that Heron had mounted in her bows. The young woman was studying the weapon with what appeared to be professional interest. There's definitely more to her than meets the eye, he told himself for the second time. Cassandra led the way back to the jetty, Stig, Hal, and Thorn following her as she stepped ashore. Maddie smiled a farewell to Ingvar. The dark tortoiseshell covers over his eyes were disconcerting at first, but once you became used to them, he was a likable character. "I've organized a luncheon in the park outside the castle," Cassandra said, as she led the way to the horses. She stopped and turned back, looking at the ship. "The whole crew are welcome to join us, of course." Hal shook his head. "Kind of you, but the lads can stay here. We hit a storm on the way over, and there are a few repairs that have to be done. Ropes spliced and rigging replaced." "I'll have food brought down to the ship, in that case," Cassandra said. "Lots of it," Ingvar called, and they all laughed. They mounted the horses. Hal and Stig seemed reasonably comfortable riding. Thorn showed a little more trepidation. He held the reins tightly in his left hand, looking warily at the sleepy horse he had been riding. "You don't like riding?" Maddie asked with a grin. "If it doesn't have a rudder and a tiller, I don't trust it," the shaggy old sea-wolf replied. "Besides, I can never find the anchor on one of these when I want them to stop moving." "You'll have a bigger problem starting that one moving," Maddie told him. He was riding the horse that had looked as if it could fall asleep in mid-stride. "That suits me fine," Thorn replied between clenched teeth. Normally, the Erluins would have cantered easily back up the hill to the castle. Out of deference to their guests, they maintained a stately walk. "Heron looks in good shape," Cassandra said to Hal. He smiled a little sadly. "Yes, but she takes a lot of maintenance these days. She's feeling her age, I'm afraid. I suppose I'll have to build a new ship one of these days, but I can't bear the idea of parting with her. This may be her last voyage. Speaking of which, what brings you here this time? The message I got said it was something to do with the archers we sent you." In a treaty arranged by Will many years before, Erluin sent a force of 100 archers to Scandia each year to help protect them against the threat of the Timajai riders. In return, Eric provided a wolf ship for the king's use, in carrying messages and helping suppress smuggling and piracy along the coast. Another part of the treaty had been Eric's agreement to stop raiding the Erluin coast. "Eric was wondering if we could increase the number of archers this year," Hal told her. Another 20 men would be welcome. Cassandra raised her eyebrows. Shouldn't be a problem, she said. Are you expecting some kind of trouble? Hal's horse stumbled slightly over a protruding tree root. He instantly dropped the reins and gripped the pommel of his saddle in both hands. Cassandra smiled and gave him a few minutes to recover the reins and his equanimity. He's got 4 feet. Why can't he stay on an even keel? Hal asked. You Scandians fascinate me, Cassandra said. You can walk around quite calmly on a ship heaving and plunging through 4-meter waves for hours on end. But if a horse so much as sneezes, you think you're in danger of falling off. You can trust a ship, Hal told her. Horses can turn nasty. And they bite. He added the last darkly. Maddie, listening, wondered if there was a story behind that particular statement. But, to answer your question, Hal continued, we're a little concerned about the Timujai. They've been sniffing around the border in the last few months, and Eric thinks they might be planning something. Their Shashan has never forgiven us for taking him prisoner years ago. Cassandra looked at him with interest. I didn't know about that. Hal grinned. It's quite a story, he said. Kept them quiet for some time, but now they're getting restless again. And Eric would like to beef up the archers' numbers. He's offering you an extra supply of timber and hides in exchange. I'm authorized to negotiate the amounts. I'm sure we can sort out the details, Cassandra said, although we may have to wait until Horace returns with the men he's taken. It was Hal's turn to look disappointed. Horace isn't here? She shook her head. He's gone north chasing down a bunch of nuisances called the Red Fox Clan. He should be back within 10 days or so. Pity, Hal said. We'll probably be gone by then. By the way, he added, when we rounded Cape Shelter a few weeks back, we sighted a Sunderland ship crammed with soldiers and heading south. They haven't bothered you, have they? Cassandra shook her head. Not that I know of. Damone, riding behind them, answered the question. They were probably headed for Iberian, he said. We had dinner with the ambassador this week, and he said they were hiring Sunderland mercenaries to put down a revolt in one of their provinces. Hal nodded. No problem for you, then, he said. In any event, once we've agreed on the changes to the treaty and restocked the ship with provisions, we'll head back to Scandia. Speaking of provisions, Cassandra told him, we've planned to hunt for tomorrow. There are plenty of deer in the forest, and quite a few boar, and the lake is full of geese and ducks. That'll make Edvin happy. He's always keen to replenish our stocks of fresh meat whenever he can. It'll make Ingvar happy, too, Stig put in. He's always keen to eat it. All right, that's going to bring us to the end of Chapter 25. Thank you all for joining me. I'll see you next time in Chapter 26. God bless, and have a good one.